If there's anything that I think our game studio is pretty good at, it's making games in a pretty small amount of time. Like, we've made commercial games in 1 month, which was honestly a little bit crazy, but also in 3 months and 4 months, and I think those games still have had some pretty good results. So a question that I often get is, well, how do you make games that quickly? Because a lot of developers find themselves on the opposite end of the spectrum, spending 3 or 4 years or maybe even longer on their game with maybe not even an end in sight. So in today's video, I want to talk a little bit more about, I think, kind of our ideas and principles on making games faster, because I think that's an important thing that you need to realize as well, is that when you're selling your game, your players will not care about how long your game's development will be. They will only care about the final end result. So if you can get the same game in 1 year or in half a year, it is going to be better to try and go for that half-year development timeline, because you're going to otherwise inflate like your recoup costs basically, because you need to earn more money to kind of cover that amount of time that you were working on the game. And players may not be willing to spend that much money on your game that would be needed to make that mod work. So there's two main things that I want to talk about here, because making games faster is kind of like losing weight. I have a little analogy here of like, okay, if you want to lose weight, there are two things you can do. Either you can exercise more or you can eat less. And ideally you do a combination of the both of those. And that is the same thing for game development as well. Either you can work more and like get more meaningful stuff done in the same like amount of hours in the same day, for example, or you can just have to do less to work on your game, which is why we, for example, also like small games, because a small game will inherently make it easier to make a game in a shorter period of time than a big scoped game. Going back to the gym analogy, there's also this saying of you can't outtrain your mouth. Basically, no matter how much you exercise and how much you go to the gym, if you just keep eating tubs of ice cream every day, which is going to be very fast, you will not be getting any meaningful progress. That's the same thing. Even if you optimize and get like 20% more development time out of your day, if you're working with a game scope that's 7 times as large, well, that doesn't really have any meaningful impact basically. So with that said, let's dive in first into how we work faster and like get more done in the same amount of time. And then later on in the video, I'm also going to talk a little bit more about how you kind of reduce the amount of work you have in general. I think the first thing that I learned, and this took me a long time as well, is that you are kind of like, I don't know what the right analogy is, but like you need to charge up. You're like a boulder rolling down the hill. When you just get started, you don't really have that much momentum yet. But as the boulder keeps rolling and rolling, you become more and more unstoppable because you just get more and more momentum. And that same thing goes with working on game development, I would say as well, where it's kind of a very much a thing that you want to get like the flow state stuff. You want to get into deep work states, whatever the trendy word for it is basically. It comes down to uninterrupted longer blocks of time will always perform way better than the very short blocks of time. So let's say you have 4 hours a day to work on your game. Well, you could either have like 8 30-minute blocks, for example, like 30 minutes to 60 minutes, or you could have like 1 or 2 very long blocks of like 2 to 4 hours that you can just sit down, hunker down and work on like one big thing the entire time. Even though you have the exact same amount of like actual like hours to work on your game, one of these is going to lead to way better results, because uninterrupted work is just way better because you get into that kind of flow state, you get that boulder running of working on one single major thing. You're not trying to context switch as much, where I've gotten to the point now where sometimes I find myself and I have like, oh, I have 20 minutes of time before like I have to go and do something else. I'm more often now making the active decision not to use those 20 minutes to do something on our game, because I know that like realistically there's not much meaningful I can do in those 20 minutes, and I'm still going to drain kind of like my brain points. So if you only have like a very small amount of time, like 20 minutes or whatever, it may just not be worth it to open the engine at that point. I mean, if you're using Unity, you're gonna be spending 5 of those 20 minutes also on just the booting screen alone. But I think at that point you may be better off just relaxing or doing anything else with your brain capacity than immediately trying to cram it into game development, but then not have enough time to actually build up some momentum. You want to have that one big feature, for example, that you can just work on for an hour, 2 hours, and that's when you get the real work done. And then the second thing that also I realized growing up is that 8 hours of work or 8 hours of basically sitting behind your computer and then like looking at your engine or at your modeling software or whatever basically doesn't really mean much. It's more about, once again, the energy of the work that you're putting into it. Because for me, I'm a morning person. If I have 8 hours of work and I start those 8 hours from like 5 or 6 in the morning and I go up until 2, or I start my 8 hours of work at 2 in the afternoon and then I go up until 10, I am not getting, once again, the same results out of those 8 hours. And this is something that you need to know about as well. And you need to know for yourself, when am I using the best brain power for my game. Because once again, even though you have maybe the same like 60 minutes, if we're looking at like a time scale, if you have better brain power, you're going to get way more done in those 60 minutes, where once again, it may not make sense after you've already done like a long ass day, you've like worked another job, you've done a bunch of other stuff, you've been out and about the entire day running errands. You may be drained enough at that point that in the evening, you're like, oh, I still have like 1 or 2 hours of time left that I could look at my game, but there's just nothing there. The energy to work on your game and to actually make something meaningful happen isn't there. You're just going to click around, you're gonna like kind of have like brain fog, you're not sure what you're going to be doing the next. And that's once again, it's like wasted time, because it's also like you could have just done fun stuff and probably you would have gotten better value out of that in accepting that, yeah, this is probably not going to be the right moment in time for me right now. Let's just figure out when is my energy higher and try to work around that. That's why you often hear that idea of getting up or working on your game before you start like your main day job, if you're combining like game dev more as like a side hobby thing, because that's the point, that you still have a lot of energy, you have a lot of capacity, whereas you may not have that same amount of energy at 9 in the evening. I know there's some people probably are gonna be like, yeah, but I work better in the evenings. Fine, but know at least when is the best time for you to work. And then the last thing, and this is maybe a weird one, is to shorten your feedback loops. So what does that mean? Try to play your game almost daily for like 10, 15, 20 minutes. It doesn't need to be long. But what I often see is developers, they kind of get into this development mode where for 1 week, 2 weeks, or even months sometimes, they just keep adding features, they just keep like working on the game, but they never really dogfood their game. They never try to play their game. Dogfooding is like when you basically like play your own game and just get yourself like to give feedback. It's something that we've been doing now lately for our own game, and I think it has allowed an increase in development speed as well, because you realize a lot more problems early on, and then you can log all of those things and you can solve them quicker as well. You know all of the problems, and it doesn't mean that you need to instantly solve it, but at least you are aware of all of the problems, and it's going to give you a way more polished state of the game than if you were just going to like, sure, this mechanic works good enough, let's move on to the next mechanic, without actually really testing, and then not just testing, but playing your game. I think that's maybe an interesting thing as well, like testing your game versus playing the game. If you're making a game, you should enjoy it enough that you can keep playing it daily anyways. That's what we're doing, for example, with our incremental MMO game, where I'm just playing that game for 20 minutes or something, and then every day I still have like a list of like new small annoyances. It could be dumb stuff like, oh, we're missing a translation here, or we should add some more sound effects or game feel here. But having that very rapid feedback loop is going to make it very clear to you of like, oh, these are some extra things that I can do to make the game feel better. These are like some things that are missing that maybe aren't the big mechanics, but that will add a lot to your polish in general and make it so that, one, you always have a playable build of your game, and two, that playable build usually doesn't have that many glaring issues because you can solve them quicker because you are aware of them way quicker as well. And then I have one like bonus thing that kind of dives into like the energy and focus thing that I don't think is like a real like game dev tip, but it's something that I just want to share with you guys because it helped me. And it's like, if you feel like you're trying to work and there's just nothing happening and you're like, I should have energy, a stupid thing to do is just to clean your desk. Once a week or something like that, I feel like, oh, why am I like struggling so much to work on my game or something? And then I just take like 10 minutes, I clean up my desk because there's like a bunch of stuff lying on it or whatever, and then it's good again. Then I kind of have like a brain reset. My work environment is more like structured and clean once again as well, and I can just move on. And I don't know, this is maybe a weird tip, maybe you've done this as well, but just try it. If you're like unsure how to work, like it's kind of like a cluttered desk is like a cluttered mind or something, have something that's like more clean, structured and organized. And it's going to help you with working, I would say, as well, because you're just going to have a better work environment compared to having a pile of like cans of Monster Energy or whatever lying right next to your desk. So those are some ways that I try to get more work done in like the same amount of time, basically, that I've been learning now. But like I said, the more important thing is often just to reduce the amount of work you have to do versus trying to speed it up. And here, you know, I didn't want to just say, oh, reduce your scope, because I think that's kind of a dumb, or like it's not helping you because you have the scope that you have right now. Of course, if you can reduce the scope, that's better, but that's not the main goal here. I think two things that I have been learning that have helped us as well is reducing the amount of decisions that you have to make. I think that's the first one, where once again, we're working on MO98 right now. And a good benefit that I've found out about using that like Windows 98 UI style is that a lot of decisions have kind of been made for us already. How should buttons look? Decision has been made. How should interactions be? Decision has been made because we look at other games, for example. There's this thing of like, there's only so many decisions you can make in a day, and game development at the end of the day is making just a whole bunch of decisions about like your game design and all the other things that you want to do. So if you can reduce that, it's also going to mean that you can probably spend more time on the stuff that like the decisions that actually matter. Does it really matter how your button looks or how exactly you're going to lay out your UI? Maybe not that much compared to some of the bigger game design questions, but they still need to be answered, these questions. And for us, we have like, you know, Windows 98 has existed for over 25 years at this point. We have a very clear style guide that we can follow, but it's also other stuff. It's like deciding to use one big asset pack for your UI components, for example, and then just consistently using that. It reduces a lot of the decisions that you need to make on UI in that regard, for example. There's other asset packs I think are a very good thing in general for this, to reduce the amount of decisions, because you kind of determine upfront, this is going to be my style reference for the game. And you're going to have to spend less time like being like, is this really worth it? Should I kind of try a different style? What about this? You can expand on this more, not just in like UI and art and visual, but also like design decisions, by just having enough clear references of what you want your game to be and like other similar games in your genre or whatever that you can draw from, compared to trying to figure everything out on the fly. Spending a little bit more time at the beginning to just play all of your competitors' games, all of the games similar to yours, so that you kind of know, oh, these are the standards in these genres. These are things that I don't really need to think about anymore. I just take this because this is what every game does. This is what my players are going to be used to. And you implement that instead of trying to reinvent the wheel every single time. You see this sometimes. And I think, unfortunately, we to a certain degree have been guilty of this as well. It's like making a game and you've never played another game in that genre before, where you don't really understand what are people expecting from this genre? What's the goal here? And you may try to justify this to yourself by being like, oh, I'm not going to get in, like, I'm not going to copy from other games. My game is going to be completely unique and original. But that gives you an extremely high amount of load of extra decisions that you have to make that may not be worth it, because you might even be making the wrong decisions that people never really asked for. And then the last thing is kind of more of a scope related thing still. I know I don't want to dive too deep into scope, but I think an important thing that can be summarized into like one sentence is to focus on depth over breadth, basically. What does this mean? Try to do less of everything, but the few things that you do, you try to do more and like deeper. Because the example I have here is like, okay, I'm making a roguelite game and I have a bunch of enemies in my roguelite game. Let's say I have skeletons. The question then is, okay, do I make skeletons, goblins, ogres, all of the other mobs basically, and just go very deep into it? Or do I say, fuck it, I have a necromancer team game and I just have one like main skeleton sprite, and then I have 8 different kinds of skeletons. I have a skeleton that throws fireballs. I have a skeleton that is like more of a mage or whatever, where you are kind of reducing the amount of work you need to do, because not every enemy starts from zero. You don't have to start every enemy from zero, but you have your base skeleton and you then make your variants of that. This is going to give you the same amount of enemies at the end of the day. And they can even have, honestly, the same amount of dynamics and mechanics for your game, but you're simply going to have to do less work compared to having to get new sprites for every single character, having to get new voice lines, new dialogue, new all of that, whereas you can once again also reduce the amount of decisions you need to make if you choose, okay, I'm gonna have this as my main like character type or enemy type, and I'm just going to work on different variants of that. So those are some of the things that we've been doing with working on our games. I think getting better and faster at making games is at the end of the day going to be a very important thing. And to a certain degree, yes, it's going to only come with experience. But it's with experience that we learned like these things that I talked about in this video as well. So hopefully you can do it in less than 3 years to figure out that, hey, maybe my energy levels fluctuate throughout the day and I shouldn't go and try to develop right after I had like a big meal or whatever, because I'm just kind of lethargic at that point. So let me know, is there anything else that you kind of have as like your top tip of like working a little bit faster or having to do less? Like, you know, there's 2 things we can do here. And is there anything here that you're doing as well that seems to be having had some good results for you? I really think you shouldn't sleep on like shortening your feedback loops of just playing your game every single day. It may sound like counterintuitive of like, oh, but I'm taking away development time by playing my game, but it is taking the time to play your game and actually note down as well, what am I doing? Not just testing like one feature, but actually trying to run through your game. That has a lot of extra value, I would say. So thank you very much for watching. If you're new here, we're game developers and we upload 2 videos every single week talking about the process of making our own games and how we've been running our studio basically. So if that's something that you're interested in, then be sure to head down below and subscribe so you'll be notified whenever we upload a new video. That's all I had to say. Thank you very much for watching. Bye!